Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I am going to be discussing my TBR, my to read, whatever you want to call it, all the books I want to read, I plan to read, I have written down on a list to read. I track this in Goodreads, and as we can see right here on the want to read, I have 241 books added, so we're going to go through what is on that list and see what I want to read. I started 2024 with very ambitious plans. I think at that point my want to read was about 180 books, and I had this plan to bring it down to 150. And as you can see, I have made negative progress in this regard. I have read some, but I have added way too many more to this want to read list. And before we get started, I just want to point out what isn't on my want to read list in Goodreads, so we're all kind of on the same page. So I track most of what I want to read or what I intentionally don't want to forget to read on this list in Goodreads. However, there are a couple categories where I don't add the book to Goodreads. The first being anything that's recommended by you guys in comments. I do always want to read those books, so I keep track of those in Excel. I just have a screenshot. Currently I have out this Witch Hunting Magic and the New Philosophy by Brian Isla and The Transformations of Magic by Frank Claassen. So these are the two that I have here, but as we can see, that's 34 books here, as well as a couple other authors that have been recommended. So these I don't add to Goodreads because I want to keep these separate and credit the people who watched my video and left those recommendations when I do review them, which I would lose if I added to this Goodreads tracker. The other set of books that I'm not adding to Goodreads is Hugo Awards for Best Novel and Best Novella. So I'm trying to read through both of these categories, both the winners and finalists, using this chart right here. And I'm not going to go and add all of these to Goodreads. I think I've accidentally added one or two or read one or two, but I'm not intentionally going through and adding all of these, even though these are all books I intend to read. That would just make this list feel very, very overwhelming, and I don't want to do that. So want to read is restricted to just those that I've added, and the reason this gets so big is because I don't just read from this list. I go to the library, I wander around, I get in reading moods, I just pull books from the library that I want to read, and as a result, I don't always read from this list. This is just kind of a running background list of books that would be interesting to read, but this is not the only list that I'm working from when I do read, which means that this list will back up even while I have read a number of books. So if I look at my reading challenge for the year, I've read 148 books, and if I started with 180 and I didn't add anything and I had read 148 from the TBR, I would have like 32 left on that list. So clearly I'm reading a lot of books that were never on the list to begin with. Just from this, I know What the Dead Know was on the list, but everything else just from this little snapshot was not from my TBR, so this is how I'm making negative progress. Books are getting added and I'm not reading down the list. So I think to get it down to 150, I'd have to read a little under 100. I don't know if I'm going to hit that 250 number this year because I have a personal life, guys. I love reading. I read daily. I read right before bed every single night. I like to read a little bit extra on the weekend or when there's a bad weather day, but I'm not reading every second of my life. I play in volleyball leagues, I play in basketball leagues, I like to go hiking, I like to go paddleboarding, I like to take road trips. I have a lot of other hobbies that aren't reading, so I don't know if we're going to hit the 150 number, but I would really like to. It's on my list of goals to finish on this whiteboard above my desk before the end of the year, but that would be very impressive if I did it. Now we are going to speed run everything on my want to read, and I would love to hear your comments, thoughts, ideas. I'm just going to go through these as fast as possible and discuss how they wound up on here or any thoughts I have on them. Please put your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. I love to receive comments. It triggers my little dopamine receptor in my brain when I see a little red notification bell on my YouTube page. So leave your comments, trigger my dopamine. All right, I've had Goodreads since 2016. This is ordered by date added, oldest to newest. So these are really old. We have this first one here, which is a German book. I have no clue how this got added. I am not a fluent German speaker. I'm at a B2 level, and I probably won't review this on my channel because I don't like reviewing books if I'm not fluent in the language. That seems unfair. The Book of the Courtier, King Lear, and As You Like It. These are just three more classic style books that I haven't read that I want to read. I am familiar with the story of King Lear, but I've actually never read the original. Ways of Seeing by John Berger. I think this was brought up in a college class I read, 2018. I would have still been in college. So this was probably a book from my college days that I wanted to read, but I never got around to reading. And so it's kind of been hanging out here. Then we have The Woman's War by Jenna Glass. This is a fantasy book, high fantasy feminist epic. And I know what happened with this one. I was reading it, and then I had to move for a job, and when I moved library districts. I moved like several hundred miles away. And so I had to return this to the library. So this is around that time of that move, and that's what happened to this one. Witchlight, we're moving up into the pandemic, January 18, 2020. So I got this book from the library, and I realized when I started reading it that it was interesting, but it was clearly a book 2 in the series, so I added it with the intention to go back and read book 1. I just haven't done that. We Were Liars, this was a recommendation from a friend. How to Do Nothing, a recommendation from a friend. Mutineer by Chris Longknife. I think this is a book I found in my library where book 2 looked interesting, but I wanted to read book 1 first. That's been hanging out again since the pandemic. Binti, this was just a book that I'd heard about, seemed interesting. This was probably when I watched more. There was a period where I listened to more people review books on YouTube during the pandemic because there was nothing else to do. But I don't do a lot of that anymore, or I'm much more selective. So I think I heard about this through YouTube. The Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval England. I love medieval history, so this one was one that seemed interesting. Ringworld. This one was a Hugo winner in, I think, 1971. It's a classic, but I added to my to-read list before I decided to read the Hugo winners. That's why that's there. Here Be Dragons by Sharon K. Penman. I wanted to read one of her books, so I started with this one. Coventry Essays. No clue why this is on the list. It probably seemed interesting 4 years ago. The Once and Future Witches. We'll see how I like this one. I feel like someone I know read this and said they didn't like it, but it's on my list. The Apothecary Rose. No clue. This one must have seemed interesting to me. A lot of these book ones, when I was in this library system for a couple years, somewhere different from where I'm living now, the library had a bad habit of just buying book 2 or book 4 in a series without ever purchasing any of the other books in the series, making it impossible to read the series. I have no clue who was doing purchasing. This was a problem with the fantasy and sci-fi. No clue who was doing purchasing. It was terrible. It actually annoyed me. So if I had to guess, this was one where I had seen like book 2 or book 3 in the library. They didn't have book 1, and so I couldn't read. This was about Burma. I realized I had Hidden History of Burma. Realized I had no clue about anything about that country, so this one was added to the list. Rage of Dragons. Saw someone review this on YouTube. All Systems Red. Same thing. I think this one was actually a finalist or won a Hugo, maybe. Red Sister. Another one read on YouTube. Let's Bake, a Pusheen cookbook. No clue how this got on here, but it's cute, so I haven't removed it. Name of the Wind. This was someone on YouTube influenced me to try to read this. Sort of Kaigen. Someone influenced me to read this. Johann Sebastian Bach. I started reading this book, and then the library wanted it back because I didn't finish it in time, so that's on the list. And that was back in 2020, so I need to get back to reading it, or find a different book. But I remember this one being quite interesting. Sheets. This was a rather popular graphic novel. Wanted to read it. The English and Their History by Robert Toombs. This one I am going to read this year. I've decided. I think it's like 1,000 pages, but I got partway through it before, again, I didn't finish it and the library wanted it back. Someone had it on hold. I am just going to have to devote a 2 to 3 week period to read this carefully, so I think I'm going to do this around Christmas this year. Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston. This is voiced by John Calipinto. SPQR by Mary Beard. I've been wanting to read this one for a while. Again, I think this is a rather long one, so I'm going to have to really commit. The Secret Token, Myth Obsession, and the Search for the Lost Colony of Roanoke. This one, I started listening to an audiobook and again didn't finish it, but it was interesting enough for me to add it. Cheese Sweet Home. I actually read volume 1, but I didn't read anything else in the series, so I need to reread volume 1 and read the rest of the series. You're going to find with a lot of manga, I'm always hesitant to start because I feel like if I like volume 1, I'm going to get sucked into like a 20, 30, 40 volume manga series, which is going to take a lot of time. But this is a popular one. It has, can I see how many views it has? Come on. Whatever. It's quite popular. The Smart Neanderthal. This is one that just intrigued me at some point, so it was added to the list. Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. This book is referenced a lot, so I decided to read it. I wanted to read, or this one confuses me why it's on this list because I swear I've actually read it before. I think I read this one with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's Flow, but I didn't ever track it in Goodreads apparently. I've heard a lot about it, it's referenced a lot, and I wanted to read it with Flow. Because they were coming up a lot in the books I was reading at the time. So yeah, this is still on the list. I'll just reread it. Knights of the Old Republic. I read volume 1 of this and it was good. Want to read volume 2. So it needs to be on here. I probably need to reread volume 1 at this point. Brainscapes, the warped wondrous map written in your brain. This just seemed interesting, so it's on the list. Still Life. I have no clue how this one got on here, but it was clearly interesting to me. I went through a phase where I read a lot of mystery. It was when I was at that terrible library district where they would only buy like book 7 in fantasy and sci-fi series, so I converted to reading a lot of mysteries, which was kind of enjoyable. This was probably one that seemed interesting. If I had to guess, maybe the library had purchased book 4 in the series and nothing else, so I put book 1 to read. The Empire's Ruin. This is just looks like fantasy or sci-fi. I'm a sucker for fantasy and sci-fi, so the covers probably got me, along with the Jasmine Kingdom. Or I know this one, I don't know how it got on here. It may have been influenced by someone on YouTube. This one, I remember the cover looked interesting. Small Town America. I think this is a photography collection. I'm a sucker for a good photography collection. They're very expensive to buy, but libraries get them, and that means that I can get all of these for a good deal. And this is highly rated, so I'm excited to read this. This is a book in German about Angela Merkel. I would like to read it in German, but I probably won't review it again because it's in German. I wonder if this has been translated to English at this point. So, Stardust by Neil Gaiman and Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. Go with the Clouds, North by Northwest. Oh, I know there's controversy around him, but I get my books from the library, so I never feel like I'm financially supporting an author. Whether or not I review them on my YouTube channel may vary. But yeah, I get all my books from the library, at least initially, so I never feel like I'm financially supporting an author. Even though there's plenty of authors who do deserve financial support. Let me get it clear there. I just know there's controversy about him right now. I think it's him. I'm not up to date with all of that. Go with the Clouds, North by Northwest. Again, this is one where I'm hesitant to start in case it's a long series, but some of this manga could be probably quick to knock out. In Order to Live, this is about a North Korean girl who escaped or defected. I don't know what the correct word is. So just seemed interesting. Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I'm a sucker for this sci-fi fantasy. Burglar's Guide to the City. Again, this seems like an interesting book on city building. It would just be interesting to see what was written in here. The Vanished Queen, another sci-fi fantasy book that, would be very interesting to read. Kai Ki, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but this one was popular a little bit ago. Here, the next 3 are recommendations from friends: Kuma Kuma Bear manga, Little Witch Academia, and Mushishi. These were all recommendations from my friend group, which are not familiar with my YouTube channel, and I would like to keep it that way. Your Inner Fish, your journey into a 3.5 billion year history of the human body. I think this would be interesting. Fortunate Tarot Poetry. This is one that I saw a review of online and decided to read. I always want to like poetry, but it's never as good as I think it's going to be, or very rarely do I find poetry as good as I think it's going to be. So this is probably added in a fit of me deciding to get back into poetry. This and Lunar Tides, which I think might also be poetry. It's probably not going to be as good, but that's just a personal taste thing. The Hollow Chocolate Bunny is the Apocalypse. This is either sci-fi fantasy, I think sci-fi, so that's probably why that's there. Hild, this one was popular for a while there. Interesting. The reason some of these more popular ones get on here too is because I am a library reader, meaning that if I don't read it, getting on a list for some of these books takes a really long time to get them. Like, I have to place a hold, and that takes many months sometimes to come in when the book's popular. So I don't even try. I just, if I'm not in a rush, I will just put it on this list, and then once the hype has died down in a couple years, I'll be able to get a copy relatively easily. So some of these more popular ones, that is also what happened. Ammonite, I'm not sure why I added this one. I'm not sure if this is poetry, but yeah, we'll see what this one is. The Song That Moves the Sun. Don't know what this one is, but it probably is either sci-fi or fantasy by the cover, so probably fantasy. So I was suckered into it. Legends and Lattes. This is one that was really popular. If I understand correctly, this is one that really kicked off the cozy fantasy, although I did try to read a cozy fantasy lately or recently, and I didn't like it. So we'll see if I like the original one that kind of kicked off that whole phase. We'll see. Pygmonia. This is a history book, I think. This is How You Lose the Time War. I was influenced to add this from YouTube, again, back when I was watching more book reviews. Yokai Stories by Zach Davison. I read another book on by Zach Davison, liked it, so I added his other book. Shadow Man, The Elusive Psycho Killer, and the Birth of FBI Profiling. True crime scares me a little bit too much to read. I started listening to this when I was running. Like, I would listen to this on audiobook when I was running, but it was too freaky. I remember I was running on this road, and then this guy started walking behind me, minding his own business. He wasn't even doing anything creepy, but he was just, I was so freaked out and psyched out from this book where this girl had been killed, and they couldn't figure out who did it, where I was like, oh no, this is so scary. And I ran back inside, and I was like, I think it's time we listen to a different audiobook or music when running. So that was the end of that. It went on my to-read list, though, because the whole idea of FBI profiling seems really interesting to me. I could do without the true crime element, but I think the true crime ties into how this started, and that's what's interesting to me, and it was fascinating. It was too freaky for me to read while running. Yuzu, the Pet Vet. This just seems like a sweet little manga series. Tsu and Tai-chan. This looks like cats. I'm a sucker for cats. 13 stories. This is one that I think it's short stories. I think it's horror, and I think it's probably going to be too scary for me, but I'm going to try to read it. I was convinced to add it to my list based on a review. The Eyes of the Dragon. One of my friends lent me this book many, many years ago. And I need to finish it and return it. It's really bad. So I need to read it. I thought adding it to my to-read list would encourage me to read it. This is why I like my library books, because there is a deadline. I either have to finish it or return it, so I read a lot more of them. When someone loans me a book, forget it. This is another volume 2 in a comic series. I read volume 1. I thought I read volume 2, so I need to double check that. Shortcake volume 1. This is a manga series that somehow appealed to me. Daughters of Izdihar, probably the cover suckered me in. I'm guessing this is fantasy. Keeper 6, this looks like sci-fi. Libriomancer, I like Jim Hines. So this is another one of his series I wanted to try. Discount Armageddon, this was probably just funny to me. I don't know what this is, but I vaguely remember just being intrigued by the premise. Outliers, this is a very popular book by Malcolm Gladwell. Rivers of London, started reading this, but I was reading it on the ebook, and I don't prefer ebooks, so I think I stopped reading it, and then I just wanted to get the paper copy, if I remember correctly, from the library, because again, I don't prefer ebooks. The Masterful Cat is depressed again. I added this to the list. I did watch season 1 of the manga that came out, and I loved it, so now I want to read this, but I know I'm going to be committing to reading many, many volumes, so yeah. Him, this is a romance. My aunt convinced me to add this to the list. I don't know if it's a gay romance. I don't know why, I feel like I'm very suspicious of romances to begin with, too. I don't know if I'm going to like it at all. Not because it's a gay romance, just because it's a romance. But it has a 4.23 rating, so we're going to see. And it was recommended by my aunt, who normally has really good, she's really good at not just saying books that she likes, but saying books that she likes that she thinks you would also like, which is a totally different skill. Odyssey of Terror by Ed Blair. This is a weird book. I met this man actually while walking around Chattanooga, Tennessee, and this man came up to me and started talking to me, just being friendly, because he had seen from my t-shirt where I was from, the state I was from, and then he started chatting with me, and I wasn't too freaked out because we were in public and there was a ton of people around. But he wound up talking to me for 45 minutes as we were walking around this park. And this was about some terrorist negotiation that he was a part of. And he wrote a book on it. So I decided to add it to the list because the man was pretty nice. Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Transportation for Strong Towns. This is about my continuing interest in needing to be less car dependent as a nation. I live in the US. Wild Massive. This looks like sci-fi, so obviously. Dead But Dreaming. Probably sci-fi or fantasy, maybe. I don't remember adding this, but I trust myself. Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. This is a Brandon Sanderson book. Sayonara Eri manga. This looks like a suspect manga. I don't know why I added this. I don't know if there's anything embarrassing in this list. I don't know what this is. Maybe I'm outing myself. Europasaurus, Life on Jurassic Islands. This is a paleo art book. The Influence Industry, The Quest for Authenticity on Social Media. Authenticity. This one just seemed interesting. Unlikely Voyage, some guy who, I think this is one of the guys who went from the Pacific Islands to South America, maybe. This is about symmetry, creating symmetry. Mathematics is a math book. Why You Like It, The Science and Culture of Music Taste. I want to read this book, but if I remember correctly, it's 500 pages. Hooky, this is a younger book. I don't know if it's middle grade or not, but I just haven't gotten around to reading it. The Elderly Lady is Up to No Good, a recommendation from a friend. Is it Bocce the Rock? Recommendation from a friend. I don't know what this is. I know I went through a period of time where I was trying to find a sports manga that featured like a women's sports team that wasn't just about like their boobs. And I did not have much success. So if I had to guess, this may have been one that seemed possibly promising, but I'm not sure what, I'm actually not, same with this one. I'm not sure what these two are, but they probably came from some research from something, and I trust myself. I do kind of trust myself that what I put on this list is something I want to check out. Zen practice in daily life. I think this was a recommendation from someone. A Map to the Sun. I think I heard about this. Ishi in Two Worlds. This was another recommendation. I think this is an older book, if I had to guess, just by the subtitle. I don't think we would publish something called The Last Wild Indian today, but I think this is a well-known book. That's why it's on here. Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, A History of Women Healers. This just seemed interesting to me, particularly the witches section. Naming Instinct, The Clash Between Instinct and Science. Not sure where this came from, but seemed interesting. The Origin of Larvae. I think someone was talking to me at the library and they recommended these two to me. I got like trapped in a conversation with someone in the news section of the library and they recommended these two to me. Hi, I got like 3/4 of the way through this book. I really like Erica Fatland, but I had to return it because other people had holds on it. Why would other people use the library? I'm kidding. But yeah, I had to return it and I haven't gotten it back out. Dome World. And it's been a year. Really? Oh my word. Okay. Dome World, sci-fi, self-explanatory. Plum Crazy, this is a cat manga. As you can see, I'm a sucker for the cat manga. Deadlands, this may be sci-fi. I'm not sure what that is. The Chaos Machine, How Social Media Rewired Our Minds and Our World. Don't use social media, guys. It's bad. The Chaos Machine. I don't know what this is, but I've heard about it. The subtitle kind of explains it. Reykjavik. I read somewhere that like a very high percentage or a higher than average percentage of Icelandic citizens have written a book, and I think that's just really interesting. So this is one. Starling House. This is just a fantasy one. The Hexologist, I assume it's also something that's fantasy sci-fi. These added. After the Forest, same reason. League of Lady Poisoners. This seems like a true crime, but not like a spooky true crime, not like a serial killer true crime, but it was about poisoners, women who poison people. So I was intrigued to read this. The Hidden Language of Cats. I would love to read about this, so I know what my cat was talking about. Bartleby and Me. This was I think this is a memoir. These Burning Stars. I think this is either sci-fi or fantasy. Intrigued. What Are the Odds? From Addict to CEO by Mike Lindell. I have no clue where I came across this book, but I'm very glad that Mike Lindell has overcome the odds to turn his life around, and I was very inspired. I have no clue where I came across this book, but I am celebrating Mike Lindell's successes. Hopefully he's not like a bad person. I don't research these people before I add them. This is where I went a little off the deep end and started adding a bunch of medieval history books, which are probably way out of my intelligence range, but we're going to try them. Book of Memory, Study of Memory in Medieval Culture, Of Giants, Sex Monsters in the Middle Ages, Constructing Medieval Sexuality, Making of Middle English, Miracles in the Medieval Mind. Probably half of these are going to be incomprehensible to me, just because I don't have the background or the intellect to understand them, but they may be interesting. The Yakuza's Bias. I know what that is, but I don't know how to pronounce it. As far as I know, a bias, isn't that like who you like in a K-pop group? Am I just showing my age? I'm old. I don't know what this is, but remember it seemed intriguing. Our Dark Window, probably sci-fi or fantasy. The Iron Trial, probably sci-fi or fantasy. Dream Park by Larry Niven. I read book 3 when I was in that terrible library system. I think it was book 3, like book 2 or 3 in this series, and I thought it was kind of fun and I really liked it, but I clearly was missing some backstory, so I decided to go back and add book 1. So yeah, this was thanks to the terrible library system. They would, like, no one, I do not understand this library. They would buy book 3 and not buy, no library in their system would have any other book in the series. And then I feel like they would buy so few sci-fi and fantasy to begin with, and when they did, it would be like book 3, and I feel like it created a reinforcing cycle where they would say, well, no one's checking out the sci-fi or fantasy books, so we need to buy less. Well, no one's checking it out because it's book 3. I can't read book 3, or I can try to read book 3, but I'm missing the first 2 books in the series. I had some problems with the library system. How to Solve It, A New Aspect to Mathematical Method. I've heard good things about her books, so I wanted to read it. Gods, Demons, and Symbols in Ancient Mesopotamia. I also have an interest in ancient Mesopotamia. Exotic Vetting. This just seemed fun. A Taste of Poison. This is related to the League of Lady Poisoners. Weapons of Math Destruction. I think this was on this list, and it was also recommended in a comment, but I had it on my list first. Okay, so this one was another one that's technically on my list to read here, but I also have it added on here. I read something else by this author, and I didn't like it, but I think maybe I judged it too harshly based on the comments on that video, but I will try something else by this author. This is one that I would like to just maybe purchase. 1,000 Destinations of a Lifetime. I wonder if I've been to any of these. But yeah. Underworlds. And so I think this... I'm not sure what this is, but it's intriguing to me. The Art of Fantasy. Just fantasy art. Fungi. As you can tell, I'm interested in too many topics and too many things. Someone on one of my videos commented recently and was like, does your family and friends think you're crazy? I think they meant it in a good way. But yeah, they probably do think I'm crazy. Gator country, deception, danger, and alligators in the Everglades. I'm not from Florida. Alligators scare me. I don't know how y'all live down there with big reptilian monsters that should have died out when all the dinosaurs did. They scare me. So this one might be a little scary. A Tainted Cup. The Tainted Cup. Probably sci-fi or fantasy. The Book of Love. Ooh. I read a review on this and decided to read it. Mercy of Gods. I like James S.A. Corey, so I'm going to read their new one. Indian Burial Ground. This is a horror book, but which I don't normally read, but I was inspired to read it. Or add it to my list by reading a review. Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. Charles Duhigg has written something else that I have read. Power of Habit. I recognize the author. Swordcatcher, probably fantasy. Sun Damage. I don't remember what this was. I think it was a thriller. I read a review on this. This is an ancient Rome mystery. It's book 11, but I'm going to read book 1 in the series. I just added book 11. But I'll read book 1. The Deep Sky. I think is this sci-fi? Blighted Stars. Sci-fi. Weaver and the Witch. I think this is historical fiction. Goodbye Eastern Europe, an intimate history of a divided land. This seems interesting. I feel like I know less about Eastern Europe than I should. Valiant Woman, the extraordinary American servicewoman who helped win World War II. This seems interesting and intriguing. The St. Ambrose School for Girls. If I had to guess, this is going to be a little spookier. I Know Who You Are. This is intriguing. The forensic genealogy that they're using to crack a lot of cold cases, to me, is very, very fascinating. And the fact that a lot of this was put together, or some of these cases were solved by essentially amateurs. Amateur DNA sleuth was so interesting. I read a book called Forever Witness, which discussed this, and that book referenced this book, and I wanted to read this one. Even though it is true crimey, I like these because the person gets caught, and they get to spend the rest of their life in jail having destroyed other people. So, bye. Go to jail. Don't care. As long as you did the crime. But I like that the DNA is we're able to crack these cases that people would have otherwise just gotten away with. Crazy. Cells at Work. My sister actually, I added this a long time ago. Well, a long time ago, January 2024. And my sister started talking about this the other day when we were watching this event, and she was like, oh yeah, I really like that series. So now I feel like I need to read it. A History of Modern Manga. I saw this one actually at the store, and I was like, that looks really fun, but I don't buy books. So I do buy books occasionally, but I mostly read from the library. Gunflint Falling, Blood on the Boundary Water. I think this is a, history or true crime or something from that Boundary Water area in Minnesota, US, and I think it also extends across the Canadian border. House Cat, Inspirational Interiors, and the Elegant Felines Who Call Them Home. Cats. Breathe, Remarkably Bright Creatures, Master Slave, Husband Wife. I think this was the one where I think the woman was she could pass as white in the late 1800s, and so she pretended to be the master, or it was the reverse. I forget what it was. They had a con going to escape slavery basically, and it seemed really, really interesting and intriguing. Secrets of the Sun. This is a memoir. Into the Sunken City. This looks like sci-fi or fantasy. Women's Work, Women, Cloth, and Society in Early Times, History. Fire Logic. This looks like fantasy, seems intriguing. Women of the Middle. Okay, now we're getting back into when I went through another academic phase and added a bunch of stuff that probably is going to be outside of my intellectual abilities, but we're trying. Women in the Middle Ages, the lives of real women in a vibrant age of transition, marriage and family in the Middle Ages, Assyria. I got so close to finishing this book, but then the library wanted it back. I don't know why there's a read date in here. I didn't finish reading it. So hopefully that doesn't count towards my whatever. I didn't finish this one. I need to finish it. The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt. Rabbit Hole, which I just realized there's someone's face on this. I don't know what this is. I think this is a little spooky. That's about a woman who wing walks and stuff. I don't know where I came across this book, but it seemed interesting. Independence. This is a fantasy book. Welcome to the Hunam Dong Bookshop. I believe this is actually a translation. I read a review on this. It seemed intriguing. In True Face, this is a woman who worked for the CIA, I believe. I think she was actually the Master of Disguise, if I remember correctly. Seemed interesting. I really wonder how much she can actually say about things, and I'm sure this was a highly edited, highly controlled book that she wrote, but it would be interesting to read nonetheless. The Unclaimed, these are about John and Jane Does in LA, so bodies that turn up, that are unclaimed, so no one has claimed them, no one has checked them. It seemed interesting. It seemed related to What the Dead Know by Barbara Butcher, which is about the death investigator in New York City. So these seem related. 49 Days, if I remember correctly, this is a woman who is trapped in a cycle following her death, I think it is, and I think is related to Korean folklore mythology. Simple Path to Wealth, my manager actually recommended this book to me from like some finance group that she was a part of, so I decided to give it a read. The Stars Turned Inside Out, probably fantasy or sci-fi. Old Flames and New Fortunes. This was a romance one, and I'm steeling myself to be vaguely disappointed, but maybe it'll be fine. Glorious Exploits. I thought the googly eyes looked fun. That's probably all that is. Where Rivers Part. I think this was a book about some refugee from somewhere in Southeast Asia. Again, I added this back in March 2024, so I'm really reaching, but the premise seemed intriguing enough. Excluded, How Snob Zoning, NIMBYism, and Class Bias Build Walls We Don't See. I'm very intrigued with like city design and how cities come to be, so this was a book in that field. Weavers, Scribes, and Kings, A New History of the Ancient Near East, seems intriguing. Dark as the Sun, this cover was just so bizarre that I wanted to read it. Winters in the World, Anglo-Saxon World History, intriguing. The Great Cosmic Mother, this is well-known, or not well-known, but I've seen it referenced in a number of books. That seems intriguing. Mostly in reference to some of the books I've read on like Inanna or Ishtar. Another book on poisons. I feel like with all these books on poisons, I'm going to be on a list somewhere. 888, Love and the Divine Burden of Numbers. Saw a review, was intrigued. Same with the Bandit Queen, same with the Ministry of Time. Same with the Honey Witch. Probably fantasy. Silk, a world history, just a history, seems interesting. The Wandering Earth, this seems like sci-fi, very interesting. I remember reading The Summary and being intrigued. The Deer Horde, an Old English bestiary, that seems very, very intriguing. Humble Pie, I started listening to this on audiobook and I realized I would rather read it in person in paper because it's math and I felt like it just would make more sense. Outlived, Science and Art of Longevity. Peter Attia, I've listened to some of his podcast stuff and was intrigued. Nineveh and Its Remains, got partway through this, library wanted it back, that's the end of that. Lay Them to Rest, Cold Case Investigators Who Identify the Nameless, similar to The Unclaimed, similar to What the Dead Know. Unfit, Unfair, Unfashionable. I have a very strong interest in like the excessive consumerism that exists in fashion. I am not a fashionable person, but I think that maybe we should as a culture think about how much we're buying. And this was a book that I heard about, but it does not seem to be very popular, and I can't find it in the library system anywhere in my state. So we'll see if I read it. Last Murder at the End of the World, looks like a murder mystery. Heirloomist, 100 Treasures and the Story They Tell. This looks like a social science photography. All You Need is Rhythm and Grit. This is about running. I think it's from like a non-runner's perspective. I run slowly. It gets done daily. Project Urbex. I think this is like exploring abandoned places. It seemed like cool photography. My Life with Sea Turtles. This is what I mean by I'm just interested in too many things. I need to become less interested because that's how this list gets so long. Like, do I care about sea turtles? Now I do. Hot Springs. I love a good hot spring. This just seemed like a photography collection. Assassins Anonymous. I think this is like a fantasy. I'm not sure exactly what to call it. It seemed intriguing. Dreadful. I think that's fantasy or sci-fi. Rewire. This is some neuro something. This is why you dream. This is about dreaming. Seemed intriguing. Invisible Labor, the untold story of C-section. Yes, that's about C-section. I'm sure after watching this, it will cement my desire to never have children because, that seems bad. But I also think it's really cool that due to this technique, we are able to like save children who would otherwise die. I'm sure it'll be a very, very interesting read, is what I'm saying. Deepest, Darkest Eden. This is one where the cover got me. It's about fantasy or sci-fi. Bowling Alone, the collapse and revival of American Community. This is a very, very oft-cited book, and I have not read it, Bowling Alone, but I think I'm going to agree with many aspects of this book. Indistractable. I think there's been some fire, or Near Isle, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly, has come under fire because, if I remember correctly, and apologies if I have this wrong, he actually wrote books, or he coached tech, or did something with tech, explaining how to get more people hooked on your technology, and now he's writing a book that's like, how to get yourself unhooked from the technology that I helped get you hooked on. So, okay. The Faded Sky, Astrology in History, a history book on astrology. Velocity Weapon. This one was actually on the shelf in the library where they put like librarian recommends. Seemed interesting. The Wake of the Goddess, Woman Culture and the Biblical Transformation of Pagan Myth. That's history. Eve, The History of an Idea. Discovering Eve, Ancient Israelite Women in Context. So this is another series of books that are probably out of my intellectual pay grade. We'll see. These Deathless Shores, sci-fi or fantasy probably. Lost Story, again, probably sci-fi or fantasy. The Lion Woman of Tehran. Am I saying that word correctly? Tehran? This is historical fiction, I believe. Frostbite, How Refrigeration Changed Our Food. This just seemed intriguing. Again, I need to be intrigued by less things because this list is too long. The Glassmaker, I think this is historical fiction. Do I Know You? A Faceblind Reporter's Journey. This just seemed intriguing. I know face blindness exists, which is very interesting in my mind because the ability to recognize faces is such an ingrained human trait, and that's a survival technique. We need to be able to recognize faces, so it seems very intriguing that this face blindness can happen, and so much of the way also we interact with other humans is based on face that, yeah, I'm just intrigued to read this author's story. Stowaway, The Disreputable Exploits of the Rat. Rats have done a lot of interesting things in human history, so this seems interesting. Sleep Like Death, this is sci-fi, I think. Ready or Not, I think this is like a coming-of-age story or like post-high school story. It was intriguing enough. Same with Age 16 is another, like, these are both like teenage books, which I don't read a lot of, but these intrigue me enough. Behind the Scenes, the Old Testament, Cultural, Social, and Historical Context, another not quite ancient Mesopotamia, but same region of the world, so. Pure Invention, How Japan Made the Modern World. This one seems really interesting to me, but I want to read this in conjunction with several other books, so it's on hold. The West Passage, this is probably, was it sci-fi, fantasy, or is this nonfiction? Not sure. We Solve Murders. This is a murder story, I think. Bright Objects. This one I have checked out on my library shelf right now, so I will be reading this soon, hopefully. The Inheritance of Rome, Illuminating the Dark Ages, 400 to 1000, History. The Central Middle Ages. Look, we're going into another list of where I got in over my head with my ability to read and comprehend these books. Inheritance of Rome, Central Middle Ages, Intellectuals in the Middle Ages. It's not me, let me tell you that. Beyond Babylon. So that was another stretch of lunacy, delusion. A Magical Girl Retires. Actually, a very, very small YouTube channel did a review on this one. And I'm blanking on her name. I mean, she gets like 10 views a video, so very, very, very small channel. But she reviewed this one, it seemed really intriguing. If I can find her, I will put her name in the comment section. My Holiday in North Korea, which I'm just intrigued by the title. River Kings, A New History of the Vikings from Scandinavia to the Silk Road. History. Bone Chest. This is about history. This is about some bone chests that they dug up. I think it's history. That's why that seems interesting. Solanin. This is a standalone manga entry. It says rain coming, but the rain has already come, by the way. I can hear it coming in the windows that I need to shut. Solanin, this is a standalone, I think it's a standalone manga series. It says volume 1 and 2, but it's all together. This is like a late 20s figuring out your life book. The Underfoot, this just seemed intriguing and had a fun little cover. And this is a book by Kelly Robson, Alias Space and Other Stories. It's an anthology, and I added it to my to-read list, having looked up and doing some research on Kelly Robson for my review of High Times in the Low Parliament, which I just did. So, My goal is to have 100 of these, and you can see I added 3 of these yesterday, today being the 20th. So I would like to get this down to 150. We will see if I can do it. What's on your to-read list? Am I crazy? Is this a very, very high number? Am I biting off more than I can chew? What do you think? Are there any books in here that you have any comments on? Please leave in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.